Alright guys, we're going to be looking at the beginning of the Revolutionary War, and we're going to start by talking about more ways in which the American colonists were resisting British control and resisting British taxes, and generally just showing their discontent with the way things were in Boston. Alright, so let's start by looking at the Gaspee Affair. Alright. We've talked about how the American colonists were smuggling to get around British taxes. Okay, somewhere in the neighborhood of 86% of colonial tea business was smuggling Dutch tea and other tea from other countries into the colonies. All right, so the British had sent custom ships to catch smugglers. All right, one of those custom ships. Okay, think of this as like the Coast Guard or the police monitoring the water, right, and trying to catch smugglers out in the open water. One of these ships was called the Gaspee, and during a storm, it ran aground. Okay, and that's like when a boat gets blown up too close to the shore and the bottom of the boat hits the coast. All right, so the Gaspee had run aground and it was stuck on land. And in 1772, the colonists, to further show their displeasure with the British, they set this boat on fire, okay, in a form of protest. This event would go on and inflame things a little bit worse because the suspects that were captured and suspected of burning the Gaspee, instead of standing trial in the colonies, they were sent to England to stand trial. And again, the colonists thought that this was a violation of their natural rights. All right, so this is when you see this picture of this burning boat, this is the British ship Gaspee. You can see the name of the ship right here on the back, and it was tasked with catching colonial smugglers. And in a form of protest, they set it on fire. Okay. Following this event and the subsequent arrests, Thomas Jefferson suggested that each colony should create a committee of correspondence. All right, now what these are groups within each colony that agree to communicate with one another about the British, kind of like a way to spy on the British and make sure that we're all on the same page about what the British are doing, that we're all informed about what the British are doing. And it was just one way to unite the colonies in a common goal to stand up against the British. All right, you've probably seen this famous image, but this is Thomas Jefferson's suggestion that the colonies unite with one another. This is colonial propaganda. You've probably seen this a bunch of times, but it says join or die, and you see here a cut-up snake. And there are abbreviations for many of the colonies attached to these different pieces. You have South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland. You have New Jersey, New York, New England, okay? And the idea behind this is each of these colonies is not very threatening by itself, but if we all unite with one another, we're dangerous like a snake, okay? To create more money for the British and to alleviate some of the pressure on some of their companies, like the British East India Company, Parliament passed the Tea Act. All right. So what did this Tea Act actually do? Remember, about 86% of the tea market in the colonies was through smuggling, through illegal smuggled tea, which is going to be cheaper than British tea, right? So the Tea Act was passed in 1773, which actually lowered the tax on tea that was imported by the British East India Company. And what this did was it made the British East India Company's tea cheaper than the smuggled Dutch tea that was in the colonies. Now, we've talked about this before, but what do consumers typically buy? If they have two products that are comparable in price, or comparable in quality, they're going to buy the product that is cheaper, right? Like if you guys go to the store and you see it's the same thing, right? Like all this tea pretty much came from China, and it's all pretty much the same tea, all right? So this would be like if you guys went to the store and you see a pair of Nikes, right, at one store, and you see the exact same pair of Nikes at another store. Well, which pair of Nikes are you going to buy? You're going to buy the ones that are cheaper, right? That just makes sense. And so the colonies were worried that other colonists would purchase the now cheaper British tea instead of the smuggled Dutch tea. Well, that's going to put 86% of American tea distributors out of business, right? And so the colonists viewed it as an attempt to push them out of business, and they were not on board with this Tea Act. The other thing that the Tea Act did was it reminded the colonists that the Townshend Acts, that they were still paying taxes on the Townshend Acts. So in December of 1773, you're going to have 3 British ships show up in Boston Harbor. The first ship is called the Dartmouth, and then the Eleanor and Beaver follow. And on these ships is about $1.7 million worth, in today's money, about $1.7 million worth of tea. Okay? And so we're going to have this showdown between the Boston Patriots, which were called the Sons of Liberty, and the Boston governmental leadership, which was put in place by the British, right? If you remember, Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Connecticut had been smushed together in a big colony called the Dominion of New England. And it was a royal colony, and that meant that the king got to put the governor in place. The governor that he put in place was a guy named Thomas Hutchinson, okay? So even though he's the governor of Massachusetts, and we think of Massachusetts as a hotbed for patriots and people who were anti-England, the guy who's in charge is an appointee by the crown. So he's going to do what's best for the British. The Sons of Liberty are going to do what's best for the patriots, the protesters, the people who don't want British tea and don't want British taxes and don't want British control. So on the one hand, you have the Sons of Liberty who refused to let the British ships unload their tea. And on the other hand, you have Thomas Hutchinson, the governor of Massachusetts, who refused to let the Dartmouth return to England without unloading its tea. So we have this ship stuck in the harbor. Sons of Liberty won't let them unload tea. Thomas Hutchinson won't let them leave. So they're just sitting there in the harbor. Okay? And at some point, we're going to have a conflict here. Members of the Sons of Liberty dressed up like Native Americans once the other 2 ships showed up, okay? The Eleanor and the Beaver showed up. Members of the Sons of Liberty were going to dress up like Native Americans, not because they wanted the British to think that Native Americans were attacking these ships, but because they wanted to conceal their personal identities. All right, so they painted up their faces, they dressed as Native Americans, and they boarded the British ships and dumped 342 chests of British tea into the Boston Harbor. Like I said before, this was at a cost of about $1.7 million in property damage. And also, just as one of those details that doesn't really matter, but that I think is very interesting, a lot of people think that during the Boston Tea Party, which is what this was called when they dumped the tea into the harbor, it's called the Tea Party. A lot of people think that the tea that was dumped into the harbor was in bricks, okay, like compressed bricks of tea leaves. And I've been doing a lot of research on this, and that's probably not the case. Probably what was dumped into the Boston Harbor was canvas-covered wooden crates full of tea leaves. They wouldn't have been packed into bricks. The Chinese did compress tea into bricks, but they usually used that for trade in mainland China. And the tea that was exported to the colonies was generally free dried tea leaves. So just a fun little interesting fact for you guys to know. But the tea was dumped into the harbor. You can see here in this picture, you've got, members of the Sons of Liberty dressed up like Native Americans. They were dressed up like Mohawk Indians. And they're dumping the wooden crates into the harbor, okay? A couple other notes about this Boston Tea Party. You had tea that was aboard another British ship that had run aground, that was not in the harbor, but ended up being unloaded elsewhere in Massachusetts. The Sons of Liberty actually tracked down that tea to warehouses in Boston and other places, and actually destroyed that tea as well. So it wasn't just the tea that was on the boats that was destroyed. They hunted down tea from the British East India Company all over Massachusetts and destroyed that tea. Okay. So how did the British react? The British react by passing the Coercive Acts. The word coerce means to force you to do something. And so the British were going to force the colonies to pay for the tea that had been dumped into the harbor. All right, so they're going to pass a series of 4 laws, the first of which closed Boston Harbor until the tea was paid for. Another law made it to where their local town meetings, they couldn't hold local elections, and many of the government posts that would have been occupied during this time were hand chosen either by the governor of Massachusetts or by the British monarchy. It required civilians to quarter troops, even in their private homes, because the colonists had resisted laws that would have made them pay for British housing of troops. So the British passed the Quartering Act, which allowed them to designate buildings for the quartering of British troops, even if those buildings were not designated for that purpose. So basically it's a fancy way of saying, look, we can house British soldiers anywhere we want to. And of course the colonists called this a violation of their rights. And along with the Quebec Act, all of these laws, the Quartering Act, the Harbor Act, all these acts became known as the Intolerable Acts in the colonies. So when I ask you, what's another name for the coercive acts, it is the Intolerable Acts. Coerce means to force you to do something. Intolerable means you can't put up with it anymore. So the colonists are saying, look, we can't put up with British laws anymore. We can't put up with these violations of our natural rights. All right. So the colonies are going to get together and form the First Continental Congress. This is a big deal because this is the colonies actually gathering delegates from each of the colonies and meeting together as if they are one country. Okay? The first of these meetings, they're not going to be talking about declaring independence. They're not going to be talking about actually fighting against the British, militarily speaking. Okay? They're just saying, look, we need to get together and we need to explain to the British that we have some issues with the things that they're doing. And so they write the Declaration of Rights and Grievances. In this declaration, the first thing that they express is loyalty to the king. Look, we don't want a war, we don't want to fight, we don't want to become our own nation, but we are loyal to the British Crown. However, we are going to condemn the coercive acts. We're going to say that this is not right, this is a violation of our natural rights and a violation of the English Bill of Rights. And we are going to form a non-importation association, or basically we're going to boycott British goods until you repeal these coercive acts. Okay? I think that would be a good place to stop this first video, and we'll pick up with the battles of Lexington and Concord on the next video. Hope you guys are having a great day.